Hey guys, this is Carnivore5 and today I have another video for you guys. We're going to talk about pulse pitching in this one. I know some of you guys had some questions on the other pitching interfaces. First, just to select it, you go to Options, Gameplay, then you go to Pitching, select Pulse. You also have the option to choose between a different pulse meter display. You have Default and Classic. Default's the borderless circle, so you guys probably have seen that if you have ever turned pulsed on. And Classic is actually like the older one. Like in MLB 12, I believe that's when they introduced pulse pitching, and it's bordered. It has like bordered yellow or white. I can't. That's white now. It used to be yellow. I prefer the classic one though. So let's go and talk about some pros and cons of pulse pitching. Pros, actually, some of the biggest pros for pulse pitching is holding base runners, because when you slide step, it's a lot easier to make the pitch. You don't have to hold L2 and then make an input for meter or analog and be super precise all at once. All you do is simply hold L2 and then you just time the pulse and pitch it. Something else that makes pulse pitching a little bit easier to hold runners is you actually execute your pitching interface before you actually throw the ball. So I executed it, I can sit there and watch Kershaw pitch, and then I can focus on the runners after that. It's also going to be a smoother transition, from pulse pitching to waiting a few seconds here, and then to make that catcher throw if they do still, it'll go right to that meter. Whereas if you're using meter or analog pitching, you're going to have a seamless transition from the pitching interface into the catcher throw, so it does make it a little bit more difficult. So in general, it's just a little easier to hold runners with pulse pitching. It's just a little bit more relaxing. It's a little easier. But there are cons. Because it's a little easier, you have a little bit less control, and you also really can't control the break in velo like you can with meter and analog. Now, I didn't talk about this too much of analog, but if you actually press up harder, you'll see it kind of shade red in the background of the interface. That means you're trying to put more velo or brake on it. And then if you don't try to do it as hard, you'll just see it like yellowish orange. Where pulse, you can't really control that. Like if I want to throw max out velo of Kershaw, it's just kind of random. I really can't control that. He might hit 92 or he might hit 95 because those are his variances. So it's pretty random. Same thing for the brake. If I want to put max brake on his curveball, again, I really don't have control over that. So there's a little bit less control over pitching as far as brake and velo go, but there's also less control for pitching, even when we're talking about specifically pitch control. So this is where we're going to talk about how pulse pitching actually works. So you guys see the pulsating circle. Obviously, it's pretty straightforward. You want to time the pulsating circle and minimize it as much as possible. Once it's minimized as much as possible, you just want to hit X. You can hit other buttons as well. Like if I'm throwing a pitch that begins as square. I don't know what that is for Kershaw. I'll change it up. I can press square again and it'll work, but I just prefer using X because that's just how I'm used to it working that way back in the old MLBs. So it's pretty straightforward on how to use this interface. Now, actually, how it works in practice, like where the pitch is actually going to go, it's going to go pretty much anywhere in that circle. So if you minimize it, as small as you can, it's going to go in that circle. So right here we actually get a pretty good spot, and it'll hit anywhere in that circle. And now it can hit the borderlines or it can go right in the middle. Most of the time it's not going to go right in the middle. Now this is only an all-star. Now if we go to Hall of Fame, this is where it gets difficult to use pulse. You guys can see it's a little bit bigger. You can't minimize it as much, and it starts to pulsate even faster. So right here there's a big variance of where this pitch is going to go. So you guys can see there. Now again, similar to analog pitching, your fastball is always going to be your easiest pitch to locate, and that's what we're using now. Let's go ahead and switch to like a slider. You guys can see how much bigger that is. We're not going to be able to minimize it as small as the fastball, and it appears to be pulsating faster because it's bigger. Alright, so we got a good execution there, but it's a lot bigger window. We aim down and in, and it ended up throwing down and away, so it's a lot harder to throw breaking balls and off-speed pitches with pulse. Fastballs, it's not too bad. But with breaking pitches, don't really know where they're going to go. You could hang them, or they could go in the dirt. It's just not a very consistent way to pitch, especially online when you have to be precise with your pitches and you're like in a 3-2 count. The game's online. You need to make a good pitch. That's why I don't really recommend pulse online too much. It's not a bad way. I honestly kind of prefer it over meter, because meter to me has just gotten really difficult, and meter's kind of just really random when you miss your spot. At least pulse, you know where the pitch is going to go, and it's easier to hold runners. But like I said, pulse is really easy to use, but there's not much upside to it. So whatever that means to you guys, if you guys are newer, I know there's a few people that use Pulse. I still recommend making that transition to analog. It's going to make you a better pitcher in the long run. Something else I want to mention about Pulse, and it's pretty similar to all the other interfaces, and again, I said this on the analog pitching video, is walks per nine is going to be your biggest factor in determining like how fast or how small your pulse circle is going to be. If you have a higher walks per nine, the smaller the pulse can go. You can minimize it smaller. It's going to be easier to hit your spots. If the worse your walks per nine is, the bigger it's going to be, and you're not going to be able to focus on a spot too well. It's going to have a larger window for error. So you might aim down and in, somebody with a low walks per nine, and say you get a perfect execution on your interface, it might be able to go anywhere, in that quadrant of the strike zone. Whereas a guy with a high walks per nine, you might actually be able to hit that spot down and away or down and in consistently. So walks per nine does have a huge impact on pulse pitching. And again, similar to the other interfaces, velo is also really important. Like if you have a guy that throws harder, it's just in general it's harder to hit that spot. The pulse is going to be a little bit larger, just kind of how it works. Kind of similar to like throwing a breaking ball, so keep that in mind. There's a lot of things going into pulse pitching, and a lot of it's just attribute based. There's not too much control you can do, and a lot of it's just really random. So the thing I argue with, you want as less randomness as possible. If you're trying to become a better player, you want to take the RNG out of the game, and you want to win a game because of your user inputs and not because of you don't want to win or lose a game because of randomness, is what I'm trying to say. But that's how Pulse works, guys. It's pretty straightforward. If you guys have any questions about Pulse pitching, leave in the comments, or you guys can ask me on Twitter at CardinalBird5, and let me know, guys, what your favorite interface is to use and why. This is CardinalBird5 signing out. Peace.